It's early days. I expect layer twos to be the biggest thing in crypto going forward on Ethereum. And I expect, challenges to be made from different kind of ecosystems out there, definitely when tokens come into the fray. So in terms of like my top kind of like layer two protocols today, it would be
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Altcoin Daily. Anthony Sassano, the man, the legend, ETH Bull, an incredible educator in the cryptocurrency space. He hosts the Daily Gwei, a weekly show linked below. Everybody should go subscribe. Anthony just did a great podcast with us about the merge. This one's all about layer two for Ethereum. We're talking Immutable X, Loopring, Arbitrum, Optimism, Metis, all that stuff, Polygon. Anthony Sassano, how are you doing today?
Hey guys, thanks for having me back on. Super excited to talk about layer twos.
Yeah, of course, man. Where should we start with this? Where should we start? Like, is it appropriate to ask, like, what do you think is like the number one ETH scaling solution?
Well, can I just, maybe we start, will ETH need L2s after the merge? Can you explain how that fits into the ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, layer twos are critical to Ethereum's scaling journey. Basically, a good way to think about it is that Ethereum itself is being engineered to be as scalable as possible for layer twos. So essentially, after the merge, as I mentioned on the last video we did, for end users, nothing really changes there because of the fact that we don't have things like sharding implemented. But the merge sets the groundwork for all of that. So after the merge, shortly, I mean, depending on your time frame here, but like 6 to 12 months after the merge, we hope to have the first iteration of sharding introduced. Now, what this iteration will do is that will give more block space for layer twos to take advantage of, which would make layer twos more scalable. So yeah, I would say the TLDR is that layer twos are absolutely critical to Ethereum's scaling journey. Without them, the Ethereum scaling roadmap or the Ethereum roadmap would be completely, it would be incomplete, and users wouldn't have any value out of it because the fees would be very high for them.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think are the top scaling protocols in the space today?
So it's still very, very early days for these scaling protocols. If you go to l2beat.com, which is a great website that tracks all of the traction of these sorts of things in terms of TVL, Arbitrum is the leader right now with over $4 billion in TVL. And if you go, you can visit like Arbiscan and OptiScan as well. They kind of like show you different stats around unique addresses on these things, daily transaction throughput, all that sort of stuff. So in terms of kind of like what has the most traction today, Arbitrum is definitely the kind of like leader there in that. But Arbitrum is what's called an optimistic rollup. And then there are other kind of ecosystems out there that are like ZK rollups, such as kind of like Starknet, which is in its very early stages, but they're making progress. ZK Sync as well, which is making progress. People may have used that if they used Gitcoin to donate. There was an option to check out with ZK Sync on there. But yeah, as I said, it's very, very early days still. There is no clear winner, I would say, in terms of like what has the most traction, what will have the most traction going forward. But right now, it seems Arbitrum is the leader in that space. But, it's funny because like Arbitrum may be the leader today, but it could be very easily kind of like, bunny hopped over, especially if one of these L2s kind of like starts using their token or does a token for incentivizing usage. We've seen how quickly that can spin up an ecosystem. So I would say, yeah, too early to tell who's going to be like a long-term winner. But I think in terms of like who's going to be strong long-term, you have, the Arbitrums of the world, have Optimism, ZK Sync, Starkware, and a lot of people like Immutable X use Starkware's technology. I think Loopring is really great. They're their own ecosystem, but they're very great. And Polygon, of course, has a bunch of different layer two teams as well out there. And yeah, so I would say they're the front runners. There are some forks of Optimism like Metis and Boba Network, which seem to be gotten a bit of traction as well. But I like bucketing kind of like them into the Optimism family just because they are forks of Optimism instead of their own kind of like a construction there.
And as a guy who's in this every day, talks about ETH every day, what is your preference, or what do you see doing the best? The optimistic rollups like an Arbitrum, or the ZK rollups like a Loopring, or does that not matter?
I think it's a spectrum. It's depending on what you want to do. So right now, the optimistic rollups allow you to do anything you can do on Ethereum layer one. They are what's called EVM compatible. So the applications that exist on Ethereum layer one can easily redeploy to Ethereum layer two with Arbitrum and Optimism and have the same experience for end users, just with cheaper fees and faster transactions. So you don't have to change anything. You still use MetaMask. You just change what's called your RPC on MetaMask, which is very, very easy to do. And then away you go on these networks. Like obviously you have to bridge in assets as well. People maybe be familiar with that. But once you do that, you're ready to go. Whereas with some of these ZK rollups as they exist today, such as Loopring, they are much more limited today. They're not going to be in the future, but today they can only do things such as kind of like swaps, right? Simple swaps and stuff like that. They can't do the broad spectrum of what you can do with Ethereum layer 1 today. But there are initiatives such as the ZK EVM initiatives from various different teams out there that hope to basically make it so that the ZK rollups are then EVM compatible as well. Now, what people bring up as kind of like an issue or main difference is that with optimistic rollups, there is this kind of like 7-day withdrawal delay. So if you were to bridge out your assets directly from the optimistic rollup, it would take 7 days to do so, because that's just how it works. And I could dive deeper into that, but I want to explain that 7-day withdrawal delay has actually been completely alleviated by these bridge protocols, such as Hot Protocol and Connext, that allow you to instantly or near instantly going to kind of bridge out of these things. So you don't have to wait for that 7-day withdrawal period. You can basically just swap using the liquidity of Hot Protocol, for example, or Connext, and they take on that 7-day withdrawal period, and they take a small fee for doing so. So that I don't foresee being an issue. And then with kind of like ZK rollups, you also have they kind of like have a faster withdrawal period. I think Immutable X is 12 hours, but that can actually, like, Loopring has it like much shorter than that. I think Loopring has it, I can't remember the last time I looked at this, but maybe a couple minutes or something like that. Something very short. They were actually aiming for within 1 Ethereum block, so 14 seconds. So there is a spectrum here. But as I said, like, there are trade-offs to each solution. There are things optimistic rollups can do today very, very well versus what ZK rollups can do. And in terms of cost, ZK rollups, depending on what they do, can be cheaper today. But once these other upgrades come in, such as sharding and through these other upgrades, they're called Ethereum Improvement Proposals, or EIPs. Optimistic rollups will actually be as cheap, if not cheaper, than ZK rollups. So I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to how well these teams can build it out to make the end user experience seamless as possible. Like, can the fees be pennies on the dollar? How fast can the transactions be? And I think withdrawal times aren't actually going to be an issue, because of the fact that I don't expect long-term any users to want to go back to Ethereum layer 1, because it'll be expensive to go there. There actually won't be much to do there. Everything will just be on layer 2, because layer 2 will be where a lot of new protocols get deployed. There are actually layer 2 native protocols that don't exist on layer 1 at all. Lyra Finance, for example, that's built on the Synthetics ecosystem on Optimism, that doesn't exist on layer 1 at all. That was deployed straight to layer 2. You do everything you want to do on there, and there's no need to go to layer 1 at all in that case. And there's something on Arbitrum called Magic, which is part of the Treasure kind of NFT marketplace, that doesn't exist on layer 1 Ethereum. So and Immutable X, for example, isn't a layer 1 thing. It's just a layer 2 marketplace, and Loopring, they used to be on layer 1, but they don't have anything on layer 1 anymore. I don't think. It's just all layer 2. So I think users won't even need to withdraw unless there's some security issue with one of these layer 2s, which is always an option. But in the kind of like steady case, everyone will just be living on these layer 2s. There won't be any need to withdraw back to layer 1.
And when do you think that will happen? Like, when does the regular user reap the benefits of all of these layer 2s? Like, I go on OpenSea and the fees are high. Obviously, fees high on ETH are a meme. When is this going to be solved for the average person?
So OpenSea would need to deploy their marketplace onto Arbitrum Optimism themselves, which they haven't done yet. They seem to be very slow in this department. As I said, there is another marketplace on Arbitrum called Treasure, which is Magic. They have their own token and stuff like that. And there's also LooksRare, which I'm sure is looking to deploy to these things as well. But that's what it would require. I know OpenSea exists on the Polygon POS chain, which isn't technically a layer 2 as is typically known. But yeah, it exists there. But yeah, that's what kind of like what would be required there. But in terms of what users can do today, I mean, Arbitrum and Optimism, they seem to have all of the major protocols that already exist on Ethereum layer 1. They have the Uniswaps, they have the Aves of the world, and you can go on there and basically do everything that you can do on Ethereum layer 1 already. And in terms of kind of getting on there, you can bridge from like Binance to Arbitrum right now. There's a few other exchanges that support this. I think Quabi supports Optimism as well. So the support's coming for that. Or you can bridge from layer 1 Ethereum, which is more expensive because you have to pay the layer 1 fees. But yeah, today, I mean, there's no waiting. You can go and play with these things today, and they have a lot of things to do on them as well.
What are your thoughts on the Polkadots, the Cardanos of the world? Do you consider those just glorified L2s?
I would say that Polkadot specifically looks a lot like, the original Ethereum design, which was basically having different shards that people would use and go to, and they'd be like different chains essentially, which is not what the sharding design is today. I don't know, like, I don't want to single out any one project. I feel like a lot of these other layer ones are taking their own scalability approach. Some people may have heard of the term monolithic versus modular scaling approach, where the monolithic is basically trying to do everything at layer one, which is what something like a Solana is trying to do. I don't actually think that that's a long-term sustainable model. And we've already seen the problems of that, where the network becomes congested and it kind of falls over, or transactions get dropped where, you can't actually get your transaction in. And then people would argue that Ethereum is the same, except it's just high fees instead, where if the network activity is really high, the fees become hundreds of dollars. That actually bars a lot of users from using it. And I would agree with that. And that's why we're scaling via layer 2. And then, you have other ecosystems out there as well. Like, Avalanche right now, the funny thing about Avalanche right now is that they just forked Ethereum essentially, and basically have an EVM compatible network, just with their own kind of like validators and their own consensus mechanism and things like that. But they're trying to do something called subnets, and these subnets just look like side chains to me. They don't actually share in the Avalanche security. They're their own kind of like separate thing that can kind of bridge into Avalanche. So there is a broad spectrum of things happening, but I think in terms of like what is the best way forward, it's like the modular approach, where you have Ethereum layer 1 as kind of like a security settlement layer, as I like to call it, and then you have like Ethereum layer 2 as an execution layer, where all the heavy work gets done, all the transaction processing gets done there, and then we just basically compress or roll up these transactions and put them on layer 1 Ethereum for security, but we get the benefits of the kind of like cheaper transactions at layer 2. So yeah, I've looked at these other chains. I've studied them. I think, I don't know. I don't think a lot of them actually have a bright future ahead of them, because a lot of them advertise cheaper fees. Well, what happens when that becomes a commodity? What happens when Ethereum, offers just as cheaper fees as these other L1s with Ethereum level security, which is going to happen in the short to medium term? I don't see the value prop there. And other people will argue, maybe some people want their own sovereign chain where they have their own kind of like security, their own validators. You can do that on Ethereum as well. Like Arbitrum introduced something called Any Trust Chain, which is their version of a side chain. You can already do that using like Ethereum native infrastructure. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of these other chains are going to have to rely on how much money can be thrown at it to attract developers and users to it, which is what I see Solana doing. As much as I disagree with Solana's architectural design, I think they actually have a very big backing in terms of like the money behind it. Same with something like Avalanche, and they probably keep them going for a while. But undeniably, in the long term, I think Ethereum's kind of like scaling roadmap in terms of kind of the modular design, having layer 2s be expressive and things like that is going to win out. These other layer 1s will. The thing about crypto networks is that they're like cockroaches. As long as they have like a small community behind them, they can live, right? As long as no one forgets about them, they can live. And the funny thing is, even the old kind of quote unquote Ethereum killers from 2017, such as Neo and EOS, they still have relatively large market caps, and they still have a small community that seem to care about them, but there's nothing happening on them. So I think, these other layer 1s, the way I like to look at them is like, what kind of mind share do they have? Like how many developers are building on top of them over the long term? Like short to medium term, it can look like they're doing well because maybe the token's gone up, in a speculative mania, or maybe there's a bunch of developers just trying them out and saying, is this actually something that we want to play with? But if you look at like the long-term arc of things, Ethereum has been around for a very long time. It has the most developers still at both layer 1 and layer 2, and it just keeps growing from there. So yeah, I'm kind of like bearish on most of the other layer 1s, to be honest.
If you're bullish on Cardano or Solana, guys, comment below. Anthony's down to hear you out. Okay.
Yeah, I'm always down to hear other kind of takes on this. Like people like to call me an Ethereum maximalist sometimes, and it's like, well, look, guys, if you're going to call me that, at least give me your bull case for these other chains. At least prove to me that these other chains have merit, and then I'll kind of like take that on board, and we can have a debate about it. Like I'm always active in the Daily Grey Discord channel. If people want to join there and call me out on it, there's actually a channel there called Other Chains. You can discuss other chains with, and every time someone tries to discuss it with me, I just say to them like, okay, well, your chain has cheap fees, but like Ethereum has cheap fees right now on layer 2, and it's going to get cheaper over time. What happens when everything has cheap fees? Like what is the value prop of your chain over Ethereum in that case? That's kind of like my broad question. So always open to be challenged on that for sure.
Do you think it's inevitable that, protocols that don't have a token right now, like Arbitrum Optimism, launch a token? Because like Midas just forked Optimism, they have their token, and I'm sure Optimism's looking at them kind of like killing it with total value locked and everything.
Yeah, I have the thesis that everything, well, almost everything in crypto is going to have a token, especially the layer twos. Like I don't see a world where they don't have a token, to be honest. And I should disclose here that I'm an investor in a lot of these L2s as an angel. But I don't get like any information on like what's going to have a token or when, or you know, when it's going to come out and things like that. But my thesis always with every project is that it's going to have a token. Every tokenless protocol will have a token. Simply, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons for that. I think a token can be used very, very well if it makes sense in a protocol. But like a lot of the time, you know, protocols will do a token because it's just an exit for their investors, for the team. It's a way for them to monetize, stuff like that. But I think for layer twos, tokens can make a lot of sense as something to stake in order to capture fees from for layer two, for fee revenue from the layer two, and basically make a profit like that. And governance and stuff like that. You know, I can see that kind of like happening. But yeah, my general thesis is that everything will have a token. So if you want to farm an airdrop and things like that, that's probably a prudent thing to do. Use these networks, you know, use the different protocols that don't have a token yet. That might pay off later down the line, because we've seen some of these airdrops are very, very lucrative, right? Depending on kind of like what the protocol does.
Anthony, my final question, and just sort of an in summation of this discussion, is give me your top basket of 6 that you like right now. I know you said it's way too early, anybody's game, but what do you like right now?
I like the ones that are building their own technology instead of just forking another kind of project, right? There's nothing wrong with forking, but I feel like if you fork another project, you inherit all of that project, and then you need to understand it as well as the original team does, which you won't, right? The original team will understand their protocol better than the forked team will. So in terms of like my top kind of like layer 2 protocols today, it would be, you know, Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, Starkware, Polygon, as kind of like the top 5. They're the front runners in my mind, and they have a bunch of projects already building with them. Like Polygon has, you know, 3 different ZK teams right now, and it's not just the ZK stuff that they have. They have a bunch of other L2s as well, like Nightfall, which is like a hybrid, and they're always announcing new stuff out there. And then Starkware, you know, Immutable, Diversify, use their technology, right? But if and you said 6, like I know I named 5. I would say Loopring is definitely up there in terms of like what they're doing. You know, they have a partnership with GameStop to do an NFT marketplace. They have their own ecosystem. They have Loopring Pay. They have a bunch of different things happening there. And I think there is a segment of the community that talks about them a lot, and there's a segment that doesn't. They seem to be forgotten about in these conversations, I think. And I think that's because they're kind of like their own ecosystem, and people kind of, you know, see, okay, well, it already has a token. You know, these other things don't have a token yet. I'm gonna shield this just in case, you know, it does have a token, and I can get more upside there. But I think Loopring is definitely, you know, in the top 6 there for sure. In terms of ranking, I don't really rank them. As I said, it's too early to say. But those are the strongest teams right now in the layer 2 ecosystem. And there's going to be more. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be more that come out of stealth. They just come out of nowhere, and they say, hey, you know, we built this thing, you know, has all this awesome technology, and people are going to go crazy for it. But you know, it's early days. I expect layer 2s to be the biggest thing in crypto going forward on Ethereum. And I expect, you know, challenges to be made from different kind of ecosystems out there. Definitely when tokens come into the fray as well.
Anything else that our audience needs to know on layer 2s, Anthony?
Bridge into them, use them. Don't just listen to us talking about them, right? Like get in there, use them, see what all the hype's about, right? Experience the cheaper transactions, experience the faster transactions. And if you just want to bridge into 1 or 2, Arbitrum and Optimism is probably the best right now, just because of the fact that they have the most to do on them, and you won't be bored on them, and you'll have like all the apps you know and love on Ethereum layer 1. So yeah, just go and do it. Like that's always what I say to people. Just stop listening to me ramble on about them, go and use them, get the value out of them, and you'll see what all the hype is about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Anthony. Big fan of your show, The Daily Gwei. Guys, everybody go right now, subscribe to The Daily Gwei down below, and let him know that you found out about his channel from Altcoin Daily. But thank you, Anthony, for being on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.